Why was the rain actually saltwater? The Last House explained. Warning, spoiler warning. This video contains major spoilers for Netflix's The Last House, including the truth about the strange rain, the creatures, and the movie's ending. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the rain falling outside your house isn't normal rain at all. It looks like rain, it falls from the sky, but there's something fundamentally wrong with it. It's salt water. And in The Last House, that strange detail becomes one of the biggest clues to understanding what's really happening outside Jason's family's home. At first, the family thinks they're dealing with an impossible weather event. But eventually, the saltwater rain points towards something much bigger: the ocean, the creatures, and a terrifying possibility that the threat outside isn't coming from another planet at all. So why is the rain actually saltwater? Where is it coming from? Can the creatures control it? And what does the strange rain tell us about the real meaning of The Last House? Let's break it all down. 1. At first, it looks like normal rain. When the strange weather begins, the family doesn't immediately understand what they're dealing with. From inside the house, it simply looks like an endless storm. Rain is falling outside. The world becomes increasingly difficult to access. And the family assumes that if they can just stay inside long enough, eventually the storm will pass. But it doesn't. The rain continues. And as the days turn into years, the family realizes this isn't a normal weather event. Something is fundamentally different about the environment outside. The rain isn't simply making it difficult to leave the house. It's gradually making normal life impossible. Food becomes harder to produce. Their supplies become limited. And the family becomes increasingly dependent on whatever resources they manage to preserve inside the house. But then, they discover something even stranger. The water isn't fresh, it's salt water, and that changes everything. 2. The rain is actually seawater. This is one of the biggest clues in the movie. The rain that seems to be falling naturally from the sky is actually connected to the ocean. It's salt water. And once the family realizes this, the strange weather suddenly has a connection to the creatures they've been seeing outside. Because these aren't ordinary land creatures, they're connected to the deep ocean. The saltwater rain therefore becomes a major clue that the phenomenon isn't simply a random disaster. The ocean itself has become part of the family's nightmare. Instead of the danger simply existing somewhere outside their house, the environment around them is changing. The distinction between land and ocean is becoming increasingly meaningless. And that's exactly what makes the rain so disturbing. 3. Why is the salt water important? You might wonder, why did the filmmakers make the rain saltwater? Why not simply make it dangerous rain? Because the salt gives us information. It tells us where the threat is connected. The creatures aren't random monsters. They're aquatic beings. They're connected to the deep sea. The saltwater rain therefore becomes a major clue that the phenomenon isn't simply a random disaster. The ocean itself has become part of the family's nightmare. Instead of the danger simply existing somewhere outside their house, the environment around them is changing. The distinction between land and ocean is becoming increasingly meaningless. And that's exactly what makes the rain so disturbing. 3. Why is the saltwater important? You might wonder, why did the filmmakers make the rain saltwater? Why not simply make it dangerous rain? Because the salt gives us information. It tells us where the threat is connected. The creatures aren't random monsters. They're aquatic beings. They're connected to the deep sea. And the strange water surrounding the family becomes one of the strongest clues pointing toward their true nature. At first, the family doesn't know what they're looking at. They only know that something is wrong. But gradually, the clues begin connecting. The rain is salt water. The creatures are associated with water. The environment is changing, and the family is becoming trapped in a world that increasingly resembles the creature's natural environment. So the rain isn't just a survival obstacle, it's evidence. 4. Is the rain actually coming from the ocean? The movie intentionally keeps some of the mechanics mysterious. We know the water is salty. We know the creatures are connected to the ocean.
But the film doesn't give us a detailed scientific explanation for exactly how seawater is ending up falling from the sky for such an extended period. And that's important. We shouldn't assume that the movie has established a conventional weather process. Instead, the strange rain appears to be part of the larger phenomenon surrounding the creatures. It's another indication that the natural world has been fundamentally disrupted. The movie isn't trying to give us a textbook explanation. It's creating a world where the ocean seems to be pushing into the human environment. And that leads to one of the most interesting questions in the film. Can the creatures actually manipulate water? 5. Can the creatures control the water? This is one of the most fascinating details to consider. The movie shows a creature using water that has already fallen to interact with the house. And that raises an important possibility. Maybe the creatures aren't simply living in the water. Maybe they're capable of manipulating or controlling seawater in some way. The movie doesn't provide a complete explanation of exactly how this ability works. But the visual connection is difficult to ignore. Water is everywhere. The rain is everywhere. And the creatures seem able to interact with it. That makes the water feel less like background weather and more like an extension of the creatures themselves. It's almost as though the family isn't simply surrounded by monsters. They're surrounded by an environment that the creatures understand far better than humans do. 6. Why is the rain so dangerous? The danger isn't only that the rain prevents the family from going outside. The saltwater has a much more devastating long-term effect. Think about what happens when you continuously expose land and resources to seawater. It damages the environment. It makes growing food extremely difficult. It contaminates fresh water. And it slowly destroys the things humans depend on to survive. That's exactly what happens to Jason's family. Their problem isn't simply how do we avoid getting attacked. Their problem becomes how do we continue living here when the environment itself is becoming impossible to survive in. The rain slowly destroys their ability to remain self-sufficient. And that's why the 5-year time period is so important. A family might survive a few days without outside help, maybe even a few weeks, but years? That's completely different. 7. The rain turns the house into a prison. The house was originally supposed to protect the family. It gives them shelter, it gives them walls, it gives them somewhere to hide from the creatures. But the rain changes what the house represents. Eventually, the house becomes a prison. The family can't leave, they can't easily replenish their supplies, they can't simply go outside and search for help. And the environment around them is becoming increasingly hostile. So they're trapped between two dangers. Inside, their supplies are disappearing. Outside, the rain and creatures make escape extremely dangerous. Why is the rain so dangerous? The danger isn't only that the rain prevents the family from going outside. The saltwater has a much more devastating long-term effect. Think about what happens when you continuously expose land and resources to seawater. It damages the environment. It makes growing food extremely difficult. It contaminates fresh water. And it slowly destroys the things humans depend on to survive. That's exactly what happens to Jason's family. Their problem isn't simply how do we avoid getting attacked. Their problem becomes how do we continue living here when the environment itself is becoming impossible to survive in. The rain slowly destroys their ability to remain self-sufficient. And that's why the 5-year time period is so important. A family might survive a few days without outside help, maybe even a few weeks, but years? That's completely different. 7. The rain turns the house into a prison. The house was originally supposed to protect the family. It gives them shelter, it gives them walls, it gives them somewhere to hide from the creatures. But the rain changes what the house represents. Eventually, the house becomes a prison. The family can't leave, they can't easily replenish their supplies, they can't simply go outside and search for help. And the environment around them is becoming increasingly hostile. So they're trapped between two dangers. Inside, their supplies are disappearing. Outside, the rain and creatures make escape extremely dangerous. That's why the title, The Last House, becomes so meaningful. The house isn't simply their home anymore. It's the last place they have left. 8. The rain connects the family to the creatures. There's another interesting layer here. The family spends most of the movie thinking of the creatures as something completely separate from them. Humans are inside, creatures are outside. The house is the boundary. But the rain destroys that boundary. The creatures don't have to physically enter the house to affect the family. Their environment is already surrounding them. The water reaches the house, it affects their food, it affects their resources, and eventually, the creatures can use that water to interact with the family's environment. So the family isn't simply fighting creatures, they're fighting an entire ecosystem that they don't understand. And the creatures appear to have an advantage because it's their world. 9. Is the ocean fighting back? This is where the movie's environmental meaning becomes particularly interesting. One way to interpret The Last House is that the ocean is essentially fighting back against humanity. The creatures aren't aliens, they're not coming from another planet. They're connected to Earth's own oceans. And humans have always treated the natural world as something they can control. We build cities, we build roads, we build houses, we reshape landscapes. We assume the planet belongs to us. But what if there are forms of life that don't see things that way? What if humans are simply one species sharing the planet with others? The saltwater rain becomes a visual representation of that idea. The ocean is no longer staying in its place. It's moving into the human world. 10. The rain also changes how we see the creatures. At the beginning, the creatures look like monsters. They're frightening, they're mysterious, and they're clearly dangerous. But once we understand their connection to the ocean, the movie becomes more complicated. They're not simply random creatures appearing during a storm. They belong to an environment that humans barely understand. And suddenly, the question becomes, are they invading humanity's world? Or is humanity interfering with theirs? The movie doesn't give us a simple answer, and that's one of the reasons the creatures remain so fascinating. 11. Is the saltwater rain a warning? You could also interpret the rain as a warning. It tells the family that their world has changed. At first, they think they just need to wait. Then they realize they need to adapt. And eventually, they realize that survival requires understanding what is happening around them. The saltwater becomes the first major clue that the situation is much bigger than the house. The family isn't simply experiencing bad weather. They're living through a transformation of their entire environment. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to imagine returning to the old world. 12. Why doesn't the movie explain the science? Some viewers might want a much clearer explanation. How is the seawater getting into the atmosphere? Why does the rain continue for years? Exactly what powers do the creatures have, and what caused this phenomenon? But the movie deliberately avoids answering every scientific question. And that fits the way The Last House tells its story. The creatures aren't the main focus, the family is. The movie is much more interested in what happens to ordinary people when they're placed in an impossible situation. The rain creates the conditions. The creatures create the threat. But the real story is about how Jason, Ruth, and the rest of the family respond. 13. The rain represents isolation. There's also a psychological interpretation. The rain becomes a physical representation of isolation. Imagine knowing that the world outside your front door is dangerous. Imagine seeing the rain falling every day. Imagine knowing that you can't simply step outside. And then imagine living like that for years. Eventually, the outside world begins to feel almost unreal. The family becomes trapped not only physically, but psychologically. The rain becomes a constant reminder that they're separated from normal life. And that is one of the strongest themes running through the movie. 14. The rain and the ending. The meaning of the rain becomes even more interesting once we reach the ending. Jason eventually stops responding to the creatures with violence. He chooses mercy, and the creature allows the family to escape. That means the movie's ultimate solution isn't simply destroy the creatures and stop the rain. Instead, the family discovers that communication and compassion may be possible. The rain may have represented the environment they couldn't control. The creatures represented the unknown. And Jason's final decision represents his willingness to stop trying to control everything through force. Final thoughts. So, why was the rain actually salt water in the last house? The movie uses the salt water as one of the biggest clues connecting the strange phenomenon to the ocean and the ancient aquatic creatures. At first, the family thinks they're dealing with an impossible storm. But eventually, they realize the water is actually seawater. And that tells us something important. The creatures aren't random monsters. They're connected to the marine environment. The film even raises the possibility that these beings can manipulate or interact with seawater, making the rain feel like more than just a natural disaster. And the consequences are devastating. The salt water damages the family's ability to grow food. It threatens their water supply. It makes their environment increasingly unlivable. And it helps turn their home into a prison. But perhaps the most interesting interpretation is what the salt water represents. The movie may be suggesting that the ocean isn't simply the setting for the creatures, it's their world. And humanity has entered into conflict with something that was already living on Earth. So maybe the real question isn't, why are these creatures attacking us? Maybe it's, why do we automatically assume they're the invaders? The saltwater rain is one of the clues that forces us to rethink that assumption. And by the end, Jason finally stops fighting. He puts down his weapons. He chooses mercy. And the creature responds by allowing his family to escape.
So the rain may have been the movie's first clue that the family wasn't dealing with an ordinary monster attack at all. They were dealing with an entirely different form of life, one connected to the ocean, one they didn't understand, and perhaps one that never saw itself as the villain. What do you think? Was the saltwater rain actually being controlled by the creatures? Or was it simply part of the mysterious environmental phenomenon surrounding them? And if the creatures really were defending their own environment, were the humans actually the ones invading? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more The Last House Explained videos, ending breakdowns, creature theories, and hidden movie meanings.